There's three pillars that I rely on heavily. The first is, telling people that you're here. So for instance, I was at a conference 2 months ago.
Hmm.
Yeah, 2 months ago or so. And, I probably talked to over 500 people at that conference. And I got some great leads out of it. And, I had some people who said, hey, I remember I talked to one person and they literally said, yeah, the appraiser we've used historically is looking to retire, or we didn't get the appraiser we used for this valuation on carried interest didn't do a great job. We need someone.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Grow IT podcast. Your host here, Alessandro Cutri, joined today by none other than Russ Slutsky. We'll be diving into his story, a little bit about his career, what they're doing over at PCE Investment Bankers, and much more industry insights. So definitely make sure to stick around. But without further ado, I'll kind of just pass it on over to you, Ross, if you don't mind just introducing yourself, to the audience and telling them a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. My
Of
name's
course.
Ross, like you mentioned. And so I currently am a vice president over at PCE Investment Bank on the valuations team. And PCE Investment Bank has three pillars. So we're primarily a mid-market investment bank. So figure 3 million in EBITDA to maybe 150 million in EBITDA is kind of our sweet spot for companies we'll help sell. And then we do both ESOP and traditional investment banking. So that's
Mhm.
one of the big differentiators for us, is where you're not necessarily pigeonholed into selling to a private equity firm or a
Yeah.
strategic partner. You can sell to your employees as well, which
Yeah.
for a lot of you know, owner family-led businesses who have had the opportunity to create a long-term connection with their employees. A lot of them are very concerned about, what happens to them after they exit the business and grow liquid.
Yeah.
And then on the valuation side, we do a fair amount of appraisal work. So that's your gift and estate valuation work, your fairness opinions, and then your financial reporting valuation work as well.
Nice. Nice. And so I'm curious, Ross, like how did you get into this space? Like what was it that brought you here, and what was that journey like to get into the investment banking side of things?
Yeah, so I have been passionate about finance since sixth grade. So going
Hmm.
back a long time, yeah, I know, crazy, right? Most kids barely know who they are back then, but I was really interested in finance from a very young age. And was lucky enough I actually didn't get an internship on Wall Street in college. So I remember my junior year, I essentially just wrote write-ups on all the companies in the mid cap and up in the NASDAQ,
Huh.
and sent them out to people. So I had this huge portfolio of equity research that I'd done.
Wow.
And so that, taught me some valuable skills. And fortunately, I was able to leverage that into a valuation role which was mostly focused on tech companies at my first job.
Hmm.
And then I spent some time at a big four firm, PwC, doing valuation work there. Uh, and
Nice.
now I'm and now I'm at a smaller mid-market investment bank out in Orlando.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
been a amazing experience. I mean, I love, look, even on my days off, I'm still probably spending at least a couple hours in Excel. It never leaves you, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, hey, man, like you said, I mean, I don't think I've ever heard someone that since sixth grade they were looking to be in finance, but I can appreciate that, right? And I can appreciate the passion, obviously, behind that as well. When it comes to, I'm curious, right? In terms of the investment banking space, kind of what you're seeing, just having your hands on a lot of things, and being probably in a lot of deals. What are some trends that are kind of happening right now within the market that kind of standing out to you?
Yeah, a couple big trends. So I'll talk on the banking side, and then I'll talk on the valuation side.
Yeah, please.
So for the banking side, we're seeing a pretty big uptick in ESOPs over the past couple of years.
Hmm.
So they've really grown more well known. as we've had a couple larger companies do an ESOP conversion versus a traditional private equity engagement.
Interesting.
And
Why do you think that
then
is?
it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of it was sparked by um, the great transition when we saw a bunch of people leaving jobs in
Yeah.
2021. Because the nice thing about the ESOP, it's got some awesome tax advantages. So you can pretty much sell your business in a tax-free way if you structure it right, because you can essentially it's an equity purchase. I mean, it's an equity sale instead of an asset. So that obviously has tax advantages for the seller. And then
Oh.
also there's I think it's IRC 1042, which essentially allows you to defer your capital gains if you put it into if you invested in a qualified asset. And I
Hmm.
think that deferral is like 40 years or something.
Huh.
So at that point, it's going into the estate laws, which treat it differently. So there's some really cool things that you can
Interesting.
do.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and then, of course, the ESOP itself is tax advantaged because the ESOPs don't pay corporate taxes.
Hmm.
So there's essentially, depending on how you structure it. Once again, everything I'm saying is these are kind of like the best cases. It depends on how exactly you want to
Got it.
set
Got
it
it.
up.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of these companies like to do it because of the tax advantages.
Got it. Got it. Interesting.
And
Yeah.
also for companies that are having a hard time retaining employees, it's a really nice benefit because the employees essentially get free equity in the business. Because what happens is the business buys you, the owner, out, and then puts the shares, sells the shares to a trust essentially. And then
Uh-huh.
the trust allocates your shares to the employees. So as an employee, I get free stock in the company, and that's something that a lot of them are very excited about and encourages longer term retention as well.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, cool. So that was one of the trends. Obviously, you see this tick up in on ESOPs. I know I cut you off. Was there a second you were going to say there was something else that you're kind of noticing as well?
Yeah, so carried interest valuation work. There's a We're seeing a lot more estate lawyers grow. I'm gonna say a little bit more selective with the appraisers that they're using,
Yeah.
especially with, so I don't know how much attention you paid, but there was a huge amount of IRS funding that occurred right before the last administration left.
Hmm.
And most of that IRS funding has essentially been earmarked for auditing. Well, maybe not most, but a lot of it has been earmarked for reviewing of carried interest. And for those of you who don't know, carried interest is essentially the incentive fee that
Hmm.
the general partners receive for breaking certain thresholds in the private equity funds that they
Hmm.
raise. Um,
Hmm.
so that's your promote. And those are typically a little bit more complex to value.
Yeah.
So the IRS is really cracking down on them because they are not as they've always disliked the carried interest loophole.
Hmm.
And now that they have the funding to challenge the appraisal, they're very excited to go after that.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting stuff that's unfolding, right? It's always it's always like there's always something new, right? In every single like 2 to 3 years, 5 years, right? There's always something that's new that's coming out in every single sector, right? And so it's always and talking with people who are on the forefront of things that are seeing live in the action, right? They're getting like yourself, where it seems like you're getting the action itself, so you're experiencing it firsthand.
Well, you
I did.
wanna
What was that?
sorry, I'm gonna cut you off real quick. You want to talk about new? I don't know if you've been following the SEC at all, but they were trying to acquire fairness opinions for GP-led secondaries. So essentially when you roll over LP
Uh-huh.
investors into a new fund.
Huh.
And that got struck down in a court case. So everybody was gearing up for this new SEC requirement. And then I think like 5 months ago, something like that. The courts ended up ruling it illegal.
Interesting.
And so that was a huge pivot. And then also the AICPA released its new guide on business combinations. So when a company buys another company, how you have to uh, account for that. So there's been 2024 has been a roller coaster of changes in both the valuation and the banking world, more
Yeah.
so than prior years, I'd say.
Yeah. 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 That so it's so interesting, right? And it'll be interesting to see what happens in 2025 as well, right? What continues to come on the horizon for
Yeah.
itself. Um,
Yeah.
but Ross, I wanted to pivot just a little bit into, because obviously we have a lot of like CEOs and founders that tune in, right? And people that are within your space as well. But we talk a lot about business development and just marketing in terms of that sense. I'm curious to get your perspective when it comes to like, finding deals or kind of what, just being inside this industry, like what's helped you from that business development side of things that's proved, to help you in terms of finding new deals, meeting new people and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'd say there's three pillars that I rely on heavily. The first is, telling people that you're here. So for instance, I was at a conference 2 months ago.
Hmm.
Yeah, 2 months ago or so. And I probably talked to over 500 people at that conference.
Yeah.
And I got some great leads out of it. And, I had some people who said, hey, I remember I talked to one person and they literally said, yeah, the appraiser we've used historically is looking to retire, or we didn't get the appraiser we used for this valuation on carried interest didn't do a great job. We need someone. So, and then I was able to say, hey, like I wrote an article, a guide on how to do carried interest valuation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me send that to you. Let's talk. Let's stay in touch, right?
Yeah.
Or make an introduction, whatever the case may be. And
Yeah.
I had maybe like 8 people who I would say there's a good chance I'm able to help them at some point.
Yeah.
And but that's 8 people out of 500, right?
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
when I talk to people, having 8 good leads is
Yeah.
considered a really good showing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
but once again, you just gotta pound the pavement. If somebody
Yeah.
doesn't need you, hey, that's okay. It's not a big deal. You know what? I'll ask you again in 6 months.
Exactly.
All
Yeah, yeah.
good.
And it's almost like it's building those relationships, right? And being able to, foster those because you're in a relationship industry, right?
Correct.
It's not just a one call sale. You're not selling, it's not those type of deals, right? So there's an element of how can you build relationships with these folks? How can you stay in contact with them? And then obviously when the right time comes, right, you're the first person that they think about, right? On that itself.
And part of that is making sure that they're able to do their jobs better, even if there's no fee engagement for them. So,
Yeah.
for instance, one of my favorite things to do is if I'm talking to someone, I always tell them, hey, even if it's not a fee engagement for me, if you need something, reach
Yeah.
out. I may be able to give you a referral to someone in my network who specializes in that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
right, my job is to help them as much as possible. And I hope that when the opportunity comes, they'll refer me in. But honestly, even if they don't,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Me
Yeah.
me getting a referral for somebody else,
Yeah.
right? That helps them. Maybe they can help me at some. It's like it's all
Yeah.
like you said, relationships. How can we be of service?
Yeah.
Um, Actually, to your point, wealth managers are a great source of referrals for us because
Yeah.
I think we talked about this earlier, but I deal with a lot of uh, founders, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of our market is your first, second generation businesses that aren't these behemoths, right? But they're providing a comfortable living, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I have a wealth manager that I connected with a year ago. We have semi-annual check-ins
Yeah.
and checked in with him 2 weeks ago and we're chatting. And I say, hey, and we're talking about what's new. I say, yeah, I'm at an investment bank. And he says, oh, actually, my relationship at the investment bank I use just left, so I need a replacement. Can you
Yeah.
introduce me to your banking team? Because I have a client that wants to sell.
Yeah.
And I was able to make that referral, right?
Yeah. 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 And it all starts, right, with that relationship, right? And so that's one of the big components of what we always harp on over here is, how are you getting yourself into more of those conversations? How are you building those relationships? What are you doing, in terms of pounding the pavement, in terms of meeting people, right? Because that's ultimately what's going to lead to deal flow, right? From that itself. And I think sometimes people get caught up with, some of the the fancy tools or the fancy things that they got to try and use, when in reality it's all about just getting into those conversations, meeting the right folks, right? And starting those up, because that's what's going to change the trajectory of what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, don't be afraid to tell people, hey, I'm here, this is what I do.
Yeah.
Keep me in mind. And then after you tell them that, you say, let's grab a drink and talk about the Eagles.
Yeah, yeah. Who do you got? Who do you got for the Super Bowl? Before that, before it obviously, well, this will go live maybe afterwards to see if you're right about your prediction.
Look, I'm from Philly originally, so I don't know what you want me to say here.
You're too
You,
biased then. Yeah. You're definitely biased.
for all my clients that hate the Eagles, because I know they're universally hated,
Uh,
I'm against them. For my guys in Philly, there you go.
it's the best way to be. It's the best way to be. But yeah, man. So in terms of kind of like, you were talking a little bit about business development. Like when it comes to, you know, what served you well. Like you mentioned some advice about kind of pounding the pavement. Like what type of mindset would you say is needed to be, successful in this industry? Like what do you feel that's really served you well in that sense?
So definitely in try going out of your way to educate people. So if you look at my LinkedIn, I think I've written maybe 20 articles on a variety of economics and valuation topics. There was a point in time where I had a YouTube channel which was dedicated to teaching about finance and economics and shareholder rights through video games.
Mhm.
Um, right. I'm literally presenting to the local bar association on how to vet an appraiser for carried interest, because I know some lawyers are struggling with it, right?
Yeah,
And you hope that some of these things result in business for yourself, but at the end of the day, that's not really the goal. The goal is to try and help people as much as possible. And sometimes that means you're not the best fit, and that's okay. I just
yeah,
refer to work um, to someone I know over in California, because they needed a real estate appraisal, and I don't do real estate appraisal. That's
yeah,
not my specialization, and that's okay, right?
yeah, yeah. But and and that's a big part of it though too, is understanding like what it is that you specialize within as well, and like knowing your lane in that sense. But also when it comes to providing value and giving us stuff away, right? I often say that the people who, if you want to make like if you want to make money, if you want to do well, and if you want to obviously like close deals, whatever it is, it's always about how can you provide as much value to people that it's just unbearable at some point that they're gonna want to come back to you, right? Or they're gonna want to give it back to your way. And so it's all about helping people out, right? And even if nothing comes from it, right? Still just helping more and more people, because it's just a law of the universe, right? You help more people at some point, it comes back to you. And so I love that you bring that up, and I think it's so important in creating content and doing these things, because maybe you're not going to see like an immediate ROI from that, in a month or 2 months, but that stuff compounds, and it has this like compounding interest, when it comes to the content, it comes to the relationships that you're building, that is the ROI is for sure there, because 5, 10, 15x, right? From when you're putting in you're almost like planting these seeds everywhere that you go. So totally agree with you on that.
I'll add to that too. It's not even necessarily about people seeing your work. I mean, the amount of times where I'm talking to someone and they mention a problem and I'm able to say, oh, I actually wrote a piece on the exact problem you're dealing with, right?
Hmm.
Like that's something that they really appreciate. Because that's an easy follow-up for me. I now have permission to follow up and stay in touch with them.
Yeah.
It's something they can refer back to all the time as well, so it's really helpful for them. And they're now looking at me as the expert in this specific problem that they have because I have significant amounts of material out there specifically explaining how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely, man. And I'd love to get your take on this as well, right? When it comes to, say like, because a lot of times people get discouraged, right? When, maybe they do something and they're not, they're trying to build a book of business, they're trying to build those relationships, and they're like, oh, this is taking too long, or they're not seeing any of that immediate return from it. What would you like? I'm sure everyone's kind of gone through that at some point, right, in their careers, one way or shape or form or the other. What would be like your thing that you would say, that's kind of helped you get through some of those maybe patches, or anything that you recommend for those specific people?
Yeah, there's kind of two parts to that question. The first one is, and this is where I think a lot of people get caught up,
Hmm.
is going and doing all these activities is time consuming. And you don't necessarily, it's not like somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, um, we want you to start doing this so you can, so, we're going to pull you off client work, right? That's not what happens.
Yeah.
It's you're expected to do these things on top of client work. And then once you produce results, then
Yeah.
then maybe you start to pare back a little bit.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think a lot of people get very frustrated or confused is because they want to do these things, but they may not feel they have time.
Yeah.
And my recommendation is the beginning is always really tough. And if you have to lose a couple hours of sleep to get those materials out there,
Yeah.
then that's okay, right? Just
Yeah.
a cost of doing business. And then the other component to it is you know, it's never a no, it's a no right now. I'm gonna pull that from my days working with VC firms, right?
Yeah.
They love to say that, and it's true, right? Because if you stay in touch with people and you seek ways to add value to their lives,
Yeah.
who doesn't want to work with the person who they like, they know, and is the expert? Because you never know what's going to happen. It could be that 2 years from now, they're going to call you up and they're going to say, hey, you know that guy who I've been referring all my work to? Well, he decided to retire. So it's now yours.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where these relationships, it's all about timing. And it's when I spent that day talking to 500 people or whatever, right?
Yeah.
The most of what I got was rejections, right? And
Yeah.
that's okay, right? And however, it wasn't that they didn't like me. It wasn't personal. One guy
Yeah.
said it best, right? He said, I already have too many mouths to feed. And so I can't, so I'm not bringing on anyone else. And
Yeah.
I said, hey, that's fair, right? But
Yeah.
there's going to be a day when you may not have too many mouths to feed. And
Yeah.
I hope you keep me in mind when that day comes. And in the meantime, let's stay in touch. Or even better, you come across somebody else who's just starting out and maybe they need mouths to feed because they legitimately just don't have someone that they
Yeah.
know who they can refer the work to. Um, and quite
And
simply, the world is really small. People
yeah.
talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And now one thing I was even going to add there, I think that's a great thing for people to do is, even if the person that you're talking to, right, they necessarily maybe not have some need for you, a great way to say, well, yeah, that's not a problem. Like, what about someone in your network? Like, is there someone else that you feel like would be experiencing this that, and then like if they like you and they've had a good conversation with you, most people are going to be happy to see if they can refer you to people, right? They're going to be happy to see if they can make introductions, right? And so just having that, that mindset that you're talking about, Ross, is really gonna that'll serve you over the long period, right? It's not being caught up with, I feel like we live in a world of like instant gratification where we want everything like now, like with the smartphones and, Instagram, social media, all these apps that kind of program us this way. But you almost have to reprogram yourself and say, like, I'm okay with building these relationships and planting these seeds and planting these trees that I know at one point are going to, blossom into what I'm looking for.
And I get it's a little different for me because right, I'm lucky where if I business development is for my career growth, it's not necessarily to for my day-to-day survival. Whereas I
Yeah.
recognize some business owners, right? And
Yeah.
or people in sales, right? Where it's directly, hey, like can I eat today? And that definitely adds a bit of pressure.
Yeah.
So I guess the other aspect to it is, hey, especially if you're in that zone, anything you can do to save up a couple months to however many you need to feel comfortable of living expenses so that you
Yeah.
can, because people want to work with people who are asking them for work, but they're not necessarily making them feel like that's all the value that they have, right? Because
Yeah.
that's not the way a relationship should work.
Yeah.
Um, so anything you can do to allow yourself to be a little bit more long-term focused, I think goes a really long way.
Definitely. You know, Ross, it's been a pleasure, man. It's been a pleasure getting the chance to pick your brain a little bit, see your journey and what you guys are doing at PC and really, your insights in terms of this world that you're in, because it's always cool talking to an expert that, that's got their hands and feet dirty, that's in the trenches, and really doing these things, right? So it's been a pleasure, man. Thanks for hopping on our show. If people are listening to this, they're wanting to reach out to you, say, "Hey, man, I want to add you in my network. We want to see, potentially how we could do business together." What would be a good way to, maybe contact you and, get you guys and be connected?
Yeah, definitely. You can email me. It's RSLUTSKY at PCEcompanies.com. That's IES for companies. My number is also 484-686-1101. Feel free to give me a call, anything I can do to help out. And also, if you have a problem that you're coming across, not related to anything that we do, um, call anyway, because I may be able to help introduce you to someone who's an expert in it.
Beautiful, man. Well, I'll make sure to include that in the description for people to go check out. If you guys didn't make it all the way to the end, make sure to go comment and like and subscribe and go check out Ross and the team over there and see what they're doing. We hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Ross. It's been an absolute pleasure, man.
Thanks for having me.